Alien girl shares her cooling breath with human, but human finds the breath carries his name. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Ethan Cole braced himself inside the narrow crack of a frozen ridge, the temperature warning on his suit flashing red as the thermal regulator strained against the rising heat inside. The storm outside wasn't a normal blizzard. It was a plasma surge sweeping across the ice fields, turning hot then cold in rapid pulses that made the ground tremble like a living thing. His visor fogged with every breath, the air inside his helmet growing heavy, too warm, too thin. He tapped the side panel, but the regulator only hissed in protest. A soft crack echoed through the rock, followed by a shimmer of cool air brushing the back of his neck. Ethan froze. Nothing should be able to cut through a plasma surge like that. He turned slowly, and the breath punched out of him, not from fear, but from sheer surprise. A figure stood at the edge of the crevice, her silhouette outlined by the storm's neon glow. Her skin was a pale cerulean blue, almost translucent in the cold light, and her eyes carried a silver luminescence like frost-catching starlight. She stepped closer, the air around her dropping several degrees, and Ethan felt the heat in his suit ease for the first time in hours. He didn't know her name yet, but later he would learn it was Silari. In that moment, she simply looked at him, calm, assessing, almost curious. His suit beeped a warning, the internal temperature spiking again. Ethan winced as the heat pressed against his ribs. Before he could say a word, Silari leaned forward, her breath releasing a soft, shimmering mist that flowed toward him like a ribbon of cold light. It washed across his helmet, slipping through the damaged seal at his jaw. The sensation was startling but gentle, cool, steady, grounding. His heart rate steadied, his breathing softened, and the regulator's frantic alarms dimmed into silence. Ethan blinked, trying to understand what she had done. The mist lingered around him, carrying a faint scent of clean metal and winter air. Silari watched his reaction carefully, as if searching for something in his expression. He didn't know it yet, but that single breath had already changed the air between them. And far beneath the suit's cracked plating, his sensors began recording a pattern he would only notice later, a pattern that somehow included his own name. The cold mist settled inside Ethan's helmet like a soft snowfall, cooling his lungs with every breath. He steadied himself against the rock wall, feeling the suit's temperature gauge drop from danger levels to something survivable. Silari stood only a few inches away now, her silver eyes watching the colored lights flicker across his chest panel as if she could read them. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The relief was overwhelming, a strange mix of gratitude and disbelief. She tilted her head slightly, studying the patch of frost now forming along the jaw seam of his helmet. Her presence felt calm, almost soothing, like a quiet lake surrounded by winter air. Ethan lifted a hand slowly, palm outward to show he meant no harm. "I do not know what you just did," he said, "but thank you." His breath fogged lightly in the cool air she radiated. Silari blinked once, her expression softening. Her own breath shimmered again, but she held it this time as if choosing not to interfere further. The storm outside roared louder, the plasma winds scraping against the ridge like sandpaper. The heat surges made the ice walls groan, expanding and contracting with each pulse. Ethan could feel the vibration in the soles of his boots. The crevice would not last long. Silari seemed to sense it too. She stepped past him, her fingers brushing lightly against the ice. The surface responded instantly, forming a thin, translucent layer that reinforced the narrow walls. Ethan stared at it, stunned. She was manipulating the ice, shaping it as naturally as someone sculpting clay. She turned back to him and made a slow gesture toward the inner passage of the ridge. A gentle invitation, not a command. Ethan hesitated. Venturing deeper meant trusting someone he had met only seconds ago. Yet the alternative was stepping back into a storm that could melt and freeze a person in minutes. His suit's regulator flickered again, unable to keep up with the unstable temperatures. Silari noticed. Her brows drew together in concern, and she moved closer, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder plate. The touch was surprisingly warm despite the cool aura around her. It grounded him, settling the last of his doubt. "All right," Ethan murmured. "Lead the way." She guided him through the narrow path, the walls glowing softly with each place her fingertips touched. The light followed her like loyal fireflies, illuminating a descending tunnel shaped by time and cold. Ethan's breathing steadied as the deeper air grew crisp but manageable. His suit finally stabilized, though the cooling pattern from earlier lingered like a gentle echo in his chest. As they reached a wider cavern, Silari finally turned toward him. Her silver eyes reflected the faint blue glow around them, thoughtful and searching. She pointed to his chest panel, then to her own ribs, then made a small circle in the air as if indicating a connection. Ethan frowned, trying to interpret the gesture. She repeated it, slower this time. Her breath escaped in a soft pulse, carrying a brief swirl of mist that drifted toward him. The suit sensors beeped quietly. Ethan looked down and saw the same faint signature appearing again on the display, the same unusual pattern that had recorded during the first breath. It pulsed once, then settled into a steady rhythm. He did not understand what it meant yet, but Silari's expression told him she did. And whatever she knew, it made her look both surprised and strangely gentle, as if she had found something she never expected in the middle of the storm. The faint rhythm glowing on Ethan's chest panel repeated itself, a quiet pulse of unfamiliar symbols that moved in a pattern almost like breathing. Silari watched it carefully, her expression steady but touched with something Ethan could not name. The cavern around them hummed with a low resonance, the kind that came from layers of ice shifting miles above. Tiny shards drifted from the ceiling like cold dust, catching the blue glow she had woven into the walls. Ethan exhaled, letting the cool air settle inside him. "You knew this would happen," he said softly, not accusing, simply trying to understand. Silari held his gaze for a long moment. Then she placed her hand on her own ribs, drew a line outward, and touched the air in front of his chest plate. The gesture was gentle, deliberate. Ethan sensed it meant something about her breath connecting to him. She repeated the motion, slower, her silver eyes searching his face as if asking whether he could follow. He tried to mimic the sequence, pointing to his own chest, then toward her. She blinked in surprise, a small flicker of recognition warming the cold air between them. She stepped closer, close enough for Ethan to see the fine crystalline shimmer across her cheekbones, as if her skin held fragments of ice reflecting the glow of the cavern. Her breath released another thin swirl, softer than before, drifting upward like a fragile ribbon. This time Ethan lifted a hand instinctively, not touching the mist but acknowledging it. The pulse on his chest panel brightened in response. His suit beeped a quiet notification and displayed a translated label, Identity Resonance. Ethan's eyebrows pulled together. He had never seen that term in any of his planetary survival training. Before he could analyze it further, the ground vibrated beneath them, a muffled thump traveling through the cavern floor. Silari turned her head sharply toward the tunnel behind them. Her posture remained calm, but Ethan sensed the unease. She made a small motion for him to stay close. Ethan followed as she guided him deeper into the cavern, weaving through narrow stone corridors where the ice glowed softly under her touch. Each place her fingertips landed left a streak of color that lingered like a faint trail of light. The air grew cooler but steady, a relief compared to the violent shifts outside. When they reached a larger chamber, Silari stopped. The chamber was a natural dome with a pool of still water in the center, its surface reflecting the faint light in perfect mirror clarity. The air here felt different, calmer, almost sacred. Silari stepped beside the pool and knelt, her fingers hovering over the water without touching it. The surface responded anyway, rippling outward in slow, concentric circles. Ethan crouched a short distance away, watching closely. The water shifted again, and for a brief moment an image formed on the surface. It looked like the plasma storm above the ridge, hot and unstable. The vision flickered and dissolved. Silari turned to him. Raising one hand, she pointed at the water, then at him, then placed her other hand gently on her lower ribs where her breath originated. The meaning was becoming clearer. Whatever she had done to save him was not a simple cooling technique. It was something tied to her people, something deeper and older than he had expected. Ethan's suit chimed once more. The identity resonance reading brightened again, carrying a faint signature that matched the earlier pattern. He looked up at Solari, realizing she was waiting for him to understand. And as the cool air wrapped around him once more, Ethan felt the first quiet tug of a connection forming, unspoken but impossible to ignore. The quiet tug Ethan felt in his chest lingered as the chamber's cool air wrapped around him, steady and rhythmic. The pool's ripples finally calmed, settling once more into a mirror-like surface that reflected Solari's pale blue silhouette beside his own. She stood slowly, her movements light and fluid, as if the gravity in this place responded differently to her. Ethan rose as well, brushing frost from the edges of his suit. "If you were trying to tell me something," he said softly, "I want to understand it." Solari watched him with a thoughtful stillness. Then she stepped closer and lifted a hand toward the front of his chest plate. She did not touch the suit, only hovered her palm near the glowing identity resonance reading. The symbols pulsed brighter, following the rhythm of her breathing. Ethan's eyes narrowed in curiosity. "It reacts to you," he murmured. "Every time you breathe near it, it changes." She responded with a small nod, then reached toward the air between them. Her fingers traced a slow spiral before gently drawing that spiral toward her own chest. Ethan recognized the symbolic link she had been showing him. Her breath, his name, the resonance forming when their air met. She inhaled deeply, and as she exhaled, the cool mist drifted forward once more. Ethan felt the lowered temperature immediately, but this time he concentrated on the sensor feedback. The display pulsed again, shaping the same pattern he had noticed earlier. His name appeared briefly in simplified characters, as if the suit was translating something hidden inside the mist. He blinked. "How is my name even in there?" "I did not say it." "You did not say it." Solari lowered her gaze, her expression turning calm in a different way, almost reflective. She tapped the side of her own neck gently, then pointed to his helmet's cracked seal, then tapped the same spot again. Ethan realized the truth slowly. Her breath had slipped through his damaged seal back in the crevice, and his exhalation had mixed with hers in that moment. A shared breath in a moment of crisis. The resonance was not her imprinting on him. It was something formed between both of them. As the realization settled in, the cavern floor vibrated again, but this time the sound was softer, more distant. The storm outside was shifting, its energy dispersing across the ridge instead of striking directly overhead. Solari tilted her head as if listening to it through the stone. Then she motioned for Ethan to follow her up a narrow incline to a smaller alcove. The alcove opened into a ledge overlooking an interior ice gorge. Soft light filtered from cracks high above, catching the crystalline formations below. The sight was peaceful, almost otherworldly. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the cold air settle in his lungs. His chest panel dimmed, only faintly glowing now. He turned to Solari. "You saved my life. But it feels like there is more to this. More than just sharing air to stabilize my temperature." She held his gaze for several long seconds, silver eyes steady and sincere. Then she brought her hand to her chest, exhaled a soft mist, and touched the air between them with her fingertips, leaving a faint swirl that drifted upward like a small signature. Ethan felt something shift in him, quiet but profound. Whatever she was showing him, it was not obligation or accident. It was intention. And in the stillness of the alcove, with the storm echoing somewhere far above, Ethan realized he was beginning to understand. The faint swirl Solari left in the air drifted upward until it dissolved into the cool glow of the alcove. Ethan watched it fade, feeling a quiet weight settle into his chest, not heavy but significant, like a truth that was still forming. The ledge overlooked the vast interior gorge where pillars of ice rose like ancient monuments. Light filtered from above in thin blue shafts, catching on the ridges and making the cavern appear alive with slow, breathing reflections. Solari stepped toward the edge and placed her palm against a formation shaped by centuries of cold. The ice responded instantly, glowing where her skin touched it. Ethan joined her, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to feel the drop in temperature that gently radiated from her presence. "Is this place your home?" he asked quietly. She glanced at him, then shook her head in a slow, graceful motion. She pressed her fingertips to the ice again and drew a looping line that branched into several smaller curves. A map, Ethan realized. She traced a point near the center and then tapped her own chest. That was her home. Then she tapped a distant point far from the branching clusters. She touched his chest plate next. Ethan understood. She was far from home, and so was he. The shared loneliness settled between them, soft and unspoken. Ethan looked at her and nodded slowly. We are both out of place. She seemed to appreciate that he had understood. Her breath fogged gently, a natural part of her species, and the mist folded toward the ice, curling into soft spirals along the cavern wall. His suit chimed once again. The identity resonance reading flickered and then stabilized, a steady pulse that aligned almost perfectly with Silari's slow inhales and quiet exhales. He placed a hand over the panel, feeling the faint warmth beneath the plating. If this resonance is a link, can it hurt you? He asked. She paused, then stepped closer. The air between them cooled just enough to feel like a passing cloud. She lifted her hand and rested it lightly against the outer edge of his shoulder plate, careful not to disturb the sensors. The gesture felt reassuring, her way of saying no, it did not harm her. Ethan exhaled softly. Then what does it mean? She looked down, searching for the right expression, then raised both hands to frame the air in front of her. She breathed gently, shaping the mist into two small forms. One glow represented her breath, cool and steady. The other shimmered, as if reflecting his own warmth. When the two shapes drifted toward each other, they overlapped and formed a single, brighter swirl before fading. Ethan watched the demonstration, realizing she was telling him that the resonance formed only when both sides allowed it, not by accident, not by force. A mutual connection created in a moment of survival. Ethan felt the meaning settle through him with a surprising sense of calm. So it is something shared. Silari met his eyes and nodded, the silver in her gaze softening. The cavern shifted with a distant rumble, but it was gentle this time, more like a reminder that the world outside was still unstable. Ethan looked toward the sound, then back at Silari. We should find a safer place before the storm comes through again. She agreed with a small motion of her hand, and led him toward a narrow passage illuminated by soft blue trails she left along the ice. Ethan followed, the resonance still glowing quietly under his hand, guiding him forward the same way her breath had guided him from the beginning. The narrow passage curved downward in a gentle arc, its walls glowing softly from the trails Silari left behind. Ethan followed close enough to stay within her cooling aura, but far enough to give her room to move with the quiet, deliberate grace she carried naturally. The temperature shifts from the storm above no longer reached them here. The air felt steady, almost balanced, as if the cavern recognized her presence and adjusted in response. Ethan's suit readings stabilized for the first time since the plasma surge had started. The identity resonance on his chest had dimmed to a soft pulse, less urgent and more like a quiet reminder. "Where are you taking us?" he asked in a low voice. Silari turned her head slightly, her silver eyes reflecting the faint blue glow. She touched the wall gently, then pointed toward the path ahead. The motion was simple, but the meaning was clear, a safe chamber deeper inside. Ethan nodded, trusting her judgment. They continued until the passage widened into a circular space with high ceilings curved like the inside of a frozen dome. Crystalline arcs rose from the floor and met overhead, forming shapes that resembled natural vaults carved over ages. The air felt colder here, but not in a dangerous way. It was crisp, pure, like the first moment after opening a door to fresh morning air. Silari stepped forward and lifted both hands, pressing her palms lightly against two opposing crystal arcs. At her touch, light traveled through the structure, spreading outward until the entire chamber glowed with a calming blue hue. Ethan watched with quiet awe. "You can shape this place," he murmured. "It reacts to you." She looked back at him and gave a small nod, but her expression held something more complex. She pressed one hand against her chest, then extended it toward the glowing chamber, showing that her ability was tied to her breath and her internal energy. Ethan understood. She was stabilizing the environment, using her natural abilities to keep the temperature consistent and the air breathable. He felt a quiet wave of gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. She held his gaze for a moment, the corners of her expression softening before she turned toward the center of the chamber. Ethan stepped closer, feeling the atmosphere settle around him like a well-fitted blanket. His suit's internal systems relaxed, no longer straining. The brace on his neck even felt less restrictive. Silari moved to a crystal formation at waist height, its surface smooth like polished glass. She breathed gently onto it, and the surface shifted into a faint image, much like the pool earlier. This time the image showed her home point on the map she had drawn in light before. The scene flickered into a landscape of tall ice structures and blue-lit pathways. Ethan saw groups of her people moving gracefully through the glowing architecture. Silari reached toward the image and tapped her own reflection, then slowly spread her fingers until the image dissolved. Ethan sensed longing. Not grief, not fear. Something quieter. A longing to return but not yet ready, or perhaps unable. He stepped beside her, keeping his voice gentle. "Are you trying to go back?" She looked at him and then pointed upward, toward the distant surface far above them. Ethan understood. The storm had trapped her here as much as it had trapped him. Her breath formed a soft mist, swirling around her hand as she touched the crystal again. The image reformed, but this time it was not her home. It was the ridge above, the storm raging overhead, unstable and unpredictable. Ethan saw the way the plasma winds bent violently. Regardless of how strong she was, she could not safely cross it alone. He looked at her with renewed understanding. "We will get out of here," he said quietly. "Both of us." Silari held his gaze, and for the first time since they met, she pressed her fingertips briefly to his suit, directly over the soft pulse of the identity resonance, acknowledging the connection they shared. The gesture was small, but in the calm blue glow of the chamber, it carried a depth Ethan felt all the way to his core. The soft blue glow of the chamber held steady as Ethan stood beside Silari, her fingertips still resting lightly over the faint pulse of the identity resonance on his suit. The moment was quiet, almost suspended, until a low tremor rolled through the cavern floor. It was not sharp or alarming, but deep and steady, the kind that signaled the storm above was shifting again. Ethan looked up toward the ceiling, where thin cracks of light shimmered through layers of ice. "We may not have much time before the next surge moves in," he said. Silari stepped back, her expression focused as she tilted her head to listen. Her hearing reacted differently than his. She tracked the distant vibrations like someone reading signals through stone. The faint mist of her breath gathered around her as she turned toward the passage they had entered from. She motioned for Ethan to follow, and he did, aware of the slight chill in the air that always surrounded her but never felt unpleasant. As they moved back through the glowing corridors, Ethan monitored his suit readings. The temperature gauge remained stable, thanks to her environmental control, but his power level had dropped to 20%, and the cracked seal along his helmet was still compromised. It would not support him long if they needed to cross any extreme shifts on the surface. Silari noticed the dimming lights on his suit. She paused and gestured for him to stop. Her breath formed a soft, controlled mist, and she raised her hands toward his helmet. Ethan remained still as she examined the thin fracture along the seal. Her fingertips hovered a breath away from the crack, and the cooling mist flowed gently toward it. The temperature around the seal dropped enough for the material to constrict slightly, reducing the airflow loss. The suit registered the improvement immediately with a soft chime. Ethan exhaled in relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. She responded with a brief nod before motioning for him to continue along the path. They reached another incline that led back toward the original tunnel, but before Ethan could step forward, Silari extended an arm to block him. Her eyes narrowed, listening. Ethan froze. A faint hum vibrated through the ice walls, not from the storm, but from something mechanical. He recognized the sound. A sensor drone. The rescue teams patrolling the surface used them to detect life signs and structural weakness, but the acoustics of this cavern distorted the sound. If the drone passed too close to an unstable ridge, it could trigger a collapse. Silari turned to Ethan with urgency in her eyes. She pointed upward toward the tunnels leading closer to the surface, then made a flattening motion with her hands. She wanted him to stay low, stay quiet, stay hidden. Ethan crouched as she instructed, his pulse quickening. The hum grew louder. Silari stepped ahead of him, her body angled slightly, as if shielding him from vibrations that might cause his suit to misread signals. She pressed her palm to the ice wall, and a soft blue shimmer spread outward, muffling the drone's echo. Ethan watched her, struck again by how she could calm the environment itself. The hum passed directly overhead. The ice groaned in response, shifting a few inches with the weight of the vibrations. A small shower of crystals fell, scattering like glitter around Silari's feet. But the wall held. When the hum faded, Silari lowered her hand and exhaled slowly, her breath forming a long ribbon of cool mist that drifted into the tunnel ahead. Ethan rose carefully, feeling the tension ease from his shoulders. "You protected the cavern," he whispered. She met his eyes and then touched the resonance on his chest again, just briefly, as if to reassure him they were safe. But this time her fingertips lingered longer than before, not out of fear or urgency, but something closer to trust. Ethan felt the quiet meaning in the gesture. Whatever happened next, they would face the surface together. The storm, the drones, the unknown, none of it felt as overwhelming as it had when he was alone in the ridge. Silari stepped back and motioned for him to follow. The path ahead was uncertain, but the way she moved told him she had already made her decision. She would guide him through the danger, and she expected him to stay beside her, not behind her. Ethan adjusted his suit, rolled his shoulders, and followed her into the shifting blue light, the resonance still pulsing softly under his hand like a promise waiting to unfold. The path ahead narrowed into a sloping tunnel where the ice walls refracted light into shifting patterns that followed every movement Silari made. Her presence shaped the environment in small but undeniable ways, as if the cavern recognized her and softened for her. Ethan kept a hand over the identity resonance on his suit, feeling its steady pulse match the rhythm of her breathing. It was subtle, but the synchrony grounded him. They advanced carefully, listening for any return of the drone's hum. The storm above still churned, but its vibrations had changed. The pulses were slower, heavier, like distant thunder muffled through thick layers of stone. "If the wind shifts again, we may have a window to the surface," Ethan whispered, more to think aloud than to instruct. Silari turned toward him and nodded. Her silver eyes glimmered in the cool light, reflecting quiet confidence. She reached out and brushed her fingertips across the air, drawing a small swirl of mist. The pattern hovered between them, delicate and controlled. Ethan recognized it. She was signaling that the connection between them would guide them through the next step. She trusted the resonance. He exhaled softly, warmed by the silent assurance. As they moved deeper into the incline, the ice around them began to warm slightly, not dangerously, but noticeably. Ethan checked his gauges. "We are close to the upper fissures," he murmured. "The thermal currents are stronger here." Silari slowed, pressing her palm to the wall. The ice responded with a shimmer, showing faint cracks ahead. She pointed toward a narrow opening that led upward. Ethan lifted his helmet light and aimed it through the gap. Beyond it lay a vertical shaft stretching several yards up toward a pale glow that hinted at open air. The wind whistled faintly through the narrow top, carrying shifting temperatures that made his suit sensors flicker. "We might be able to climb this," he said, "but the currents are unstable." Before he could take another step, Silari placed a hand gently on his arm. Her expression had changed. There was resolve in her eyes, but also something else, recognition. She stepped closer to him, close enough that the cool aura surrounding her enveloped the space between them entirely. She looked down at the identity resonance on his chest and inhaled slowly. Her breath deepened, drawing in the stabilized air she had created in the chamber below. Then, she exhaled, releasing a stream of cool mist that flowed in a controlled pattern around the vertical shaft. Ethan watched as the mist spiraled upward, testing the rising currents. The swirling air revealed the hidden truth. The shaft was safer than it appeared. The wind was chaotic near the top, but the walls were strong. If they moved together and timed it right, they could reach the surface before the next surge. Ethan looked back at her. "You were testing the air for us." She nodded, her gesture calm. Then she touched her fingertips to his chest plate again, letting the cool mist settle briefly against the resonance. Ethan felt the soft pulse brighten beneath his hand. It was as though the resonance was responding to her encouragement, aligning itself with her intention. His voice lowered. "Are you showing me how to trust it?" Silari met his eyes, holding them with quiet certainty. She lifted her hand and rested it over her own heart, then extended that same hand toward him, a gentle offer, a shared understanding, a shared path upward. Ethan stepped closer, letting the faint coolness of her touch guide his breath into steadiness. The shaft loomed ahead, tall and uncertain, but no longer impossible. Together, they approached the base of the climb. Silari placed her hand against the ice, and it glowed faintly, forming subtle footholds shaped by her touch. She looked back at Ethan once more, her gaze steady. The meaning in her expression was clear. They would not ascend this alone. The resonance pulsed softly under his hand, a quiet affirmation that whatever waited above, their connection was ready for it. The vertical shaft rose above them like a frozen throat of light, its walls gleaming with faint blue reflections that danced each time Silari breathed. Ethan placed his hand against the first foothold she shaped, feeling the cool imprint of her touch still lingering in the ice. His suit registered the path ahead with a series of soft chimes, confirming the structural integrity she had tested with her breath. Silari looked back at him once, her silver eyes steady, then began her ascent. Her movements were smooth and controlled, each foothold blooming under her fingertips like a small star before fading back into the natural glow of the shaft. Ethan followed, keeping a steady rhythm, trusting the steps she created. As they climbed, the wind above shifted again, sending a faint pulse of warm air spiraling downward. Ethan braced himself, but Silari extended her hand and released a soft stream of cooling mist that wrapped around the warm current and softened it before it reached him. She glanced down at him, her expression calm, as if to reassure him that she was aware of every shift before he felt it. The identity resonance on Ethan's chest pulsed in response, synchronizing with her exhale. It steadied him more than the footholds did. The climb grew steeper as they neared the top, and the light from the surface grew brighter, painting the ice in pale gold. The glow reflected on Silari's skin, turning her pale blue complexion into a spectrum of soft, shifting colors. For a brief moment Ethan paused, struck by the sight, but she reached down and gestured for him to keep moving. Her hand remained extended until he climbed high enough to meet her. When they reached the final stretch, the opening to the surface narrowed into a slender gap that let in a thin beam of daylight. The storm had weakened, its roar now a distant hum. Silari approached the edge, placing her palm near the narrow fissure. The light refracted across her fingers, scattering into soft arcs. She breathed gently, sending a stream of cool mist through the gap. Ethan realized she was testing the outside air again, sensing the pattern of the wind like she had before. After a long moment, she turned toward him. Her eyes softened, carrying an understanding he could feel rather than decipher. She lifted her hand and pressed her fingertips briefly to the identity resonance on his suit. The pulse brightened under her touch. Ethan placed his own hand over hers, steady and deliberate. No words passed between them, but the silence felt complete, filled with meaning. Silari withdrew her hand and stepped aside, giving him room to reach the opening. Ethan pulled himself upward, emerging into the muted daylight. The surface stretched out in rolling ridges of ice and pale blue fog. The storm had moved to the far horizon, leaving behind only the soft crackle of settling frost. He reached down and helped Silari step up beside him. As she emerged into the light, a faint shimmer of breath drifted from her lips, catching the sunlight in a delicate silver arc. She looked at the world around them, then at Ethan. The wind rose gently, brushing past them like a whisper. The identity resonance glowed faintly on his chest, reflecting in her eyes. She lifted her gaze to his, and for the first time since they met, the cool air around her warmed just enough to feel like a quiet acknowledgement. A connection formed in the depths of a cavern now carried into the open world. Ethan stood beside her in the pale morning light, the storm finally behind them, the air calm and open. Silari breathed once more, a soft ribbon of cool mist drifting through the space between them before fading slowly into the bright, waiting sky.